Tonight on WVW Broadcast Network News, we'll talk about the coup attempt against President Trump. But it was more than just a coup attempt at the deep state level. Was there also a communist conspiracy? Tonight, my guest is Diana West, author of the groundbreaking investigation, Red Thread. We'll also connect the evangelical deep state with the intelligence deep state. WVW Broadcast Network News begins right now.
This is WVW Broadcast Network News and Commentary with Brannon and Howse.
Welcome, my friends, to the program. Glad you are with us. And Diana West joins us tonight. She is author of the book, The Red Thread. Now, I've got it printed out on 8.5 by 11 because I had to have it right away. But you can order it at Amazon, and it is groundbreaking. In fact, in this very studio, just a few days ago, our broadcaster, Chris Govitz, who infiltrated CARE undercover, they're really Hamas doing business as CARE in America, he interviewed, former National Security Council official Rich Higgins, who was inside the White House with Donald Trump, as I said, on his NSC board. He had great praise for Diana West and her groundbreaking book, The Red Thread. Diana, welcome to the broadcast. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Brannon.
We had you on radio, and what we found out, Diana, was that there was indeed a conspiracy to carry out a coup against Donald Trump. But what I was not aware of is that all the state actors that we hear about on talk radio and talk television, what we found out is that many of them have a communist background or worldview. Let's start with, I guess Bruce and Nellie Orr, because as the former NSC official Rich Higgins said, when you peel back the onion, you find them at the center.
That's correct. And it's also the place where you really can begin to find the red thread and follow it. And what I mean by that is that most of these players that we've been hearing about now for several years are high officials inside the government, at the very top of the FBI and the Justice Department and elsewhere. And as far as citizens go trying to understand who these people really are, we're generally stopped by the suit and tie and the resume and the phrases that they issue now and then as FBI director or senior State Department official or Justice Department official. So it's very hard to really understand what makes them tick. When we first heard about Bruce and Nellie Orr, the challenge to me as a reporter was to look at Nellie, because Bruce Orr, the husband, was a senior Justice Department official. He still is, I will add, although he has been demoted. And Nellie, however, was someone employed by Fusion GPS, which is the shop that created the so-called Steele dossier. And Nellie had been a professor of Russian studies at Vassar College in the 1990s. And when I heard that, I knew that that would mean that there would be writings, book reviews, a thesis out there that one could start to read and puzzle over and try to put together some kind of an ideological profile. And that is what I did with Nellie Orr, going back, I guess, starting in December of 2017. And over time, I was able to crack her code and discover a very soft spot for some of the excitement of the Stalin era, as she put it, as well as acknowledging there was terror there. But you started to see someone who was literally open to and very laudatory of the good parts of what we would revile as the communist dictatorship of Joseph Stalin that killed tens of millions of people. So this was a real breakthrough in terms of understanding who someone at the very center of the anti-Trump conspiracy was, someone very open to the developments of international communism. So that was kind of the beginning of my thread. And I developed a profile of Nellie based on her writings, and then began to look elsewhere to see what other clues I could pick up.
So what other clues did you pick up? And I guess I already know the answer because I've read The Red Thread, but one of them to me was the most shocking, or I should say one of the most shocking, was James Comey and his love of a guy that I wrote about in my book, Marxianity, and his,
Right.
James Comey's, love of a guy by the name of Reinhold Niebuhr.
Yes.
What we're finding is whether it's John Brennan, James Comey, Bruce and Nellie Orr, many of them have sympathies, if not outright praise, for known communists. I mean, I guess before we jump into James Comey, we should backtrack a little bit because Rich Higgins, the former National Security Council official for President Donald Trump, said on the broadcast from our studio with Chris Gobbets that Nellie Orr was communicating one-way direction communication with, I think, the communist, was it? Or who was she communicating with in one-way communication over a ham radio? What was she doing there, Diana?
I don't know the answer to whom she was communicating with. The fact that she took out a ham radio operator's license is still one of the big tells in all of this, because people who follow Cold War history know that this was a very choice means of communications among spies back in the day, because it is hard to trace. We also should add that Nellie Orr had a long-term CIA association, which elevates her not just from being a professor, but having intelligence world experience. I don't think we know yet if she knew John Brannon, but that certainly is a possibility. And I think that it makes her, in my view, I think I went from Nellie not straight to Comey, but looking at her CIA association made me think of her as the opposite number of the very famous Christopher Steele, who is a former British intelligence officer whose name is on the Steele dossier and kind of is the kind of the contractor on that document in terms of having pulled it together. We don't exactly know who wrote it all together, but it's his name on it and supposedly his sources. We should also add that at Fusion GPS is a Vassar alumnus who may well have been a student of Nellie Orr. He was a Russian studies major at Vassar in the mid-1990s when Nellie Orr was a professor there. His name is Edward Baumgartner. And from what we know, he was the man on the ground in Russia, if indeed they were literally cultivating Russian sources on site. We don't even know if that's true, but he did have experience inside Russia. Christopher Steele did not. So we start to see a little nexus there of Vassar, CIA, MI6, and looking at Christopher Steele's background, we find that when he was a student, he was a very prominent student at Cambridge University who became president of their storied debating society, the Cambridge Union, very famous institution. And he was known on campus as a confirmed socialist. So we have Nellie Orr, who can certainly be described as a Stalin apologist to some degree, opposite number coming from the British intelligence world, being a confirmed socialist, who also had association or work with some description of a link with the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, which was very prominent in the 1970s and 80s as basically a Marxist front in England that was very much in tune with the Soviet foreign policy, which was at that time determined to keep America from bringing missiles into Europe, defensive missiles, and to eject any sort of bases of America in the United Kingdom. So very much working to split the relationship between America and the United Kingdom. And Christopher Steele was described, the phrase was, he had CND credentials, which is still, again, not quite described, but reported in the British media, as well as having been a confirmed socialist, as well as having had an intelligence career in Moscow. He began, this is what's so strange about, and how sick, really, about our intelligence world. We get somebody like a Christopher Steele, known on campus as a socialist, known with these leanings that were at the time considered in line with the Soviet Union back in the Cold War. And his job out of Cambridge was with British intelligence, who sent him to Moscow. So we're looking at either complete obliviousness on the part of the people who hired him or sympathy. So again, this is not what we want to see guarding our walls and borders and Magna Cartas and constitutions and all the rest of it in terms of our essential defenses.
So Steele, for our audience, make sure they understand, he was the one that helped put together the dossier against Donald Trump, correct?
Yes, he's considered kind of the broker, might be the right word. He's the broker of the dossier. And this is done in conjunction with a group called Fusion GPS, correct? Right.
And
correct.
Fusion GPS were they doing any kind of contract work with Hillary Clinton and her campaign? What's the connection between Fusion GPS and Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign?
This was the most important point of exposure for me in terms of trying to unravel the entire anti-Trump conspiracy. In October of 2017, so in other words, 10 months passed from the point of the Steele dossier hitting the news and the Trump administration going to work in January of 2017, all the way to October, is when we found out that the bankroll, the clients of Fusion GPS on this anti-Trump conspiracy Steele dossier were the Democratic National Committee and the Hillary Clinton campaign. So this becomes the moment where we can say with 100% certainty that the Steele dossier was, quote, opposition research. It was a Hillary Clinton campaign political document that was weaponized and used to kick off all of the domestic surveillance, also known as spying, that we've been talking about against the political opposition party, namely the Donald Trump campaign, and then the Donald Trump presidency. So that was an extremely important revelation, because then you can start unlocking this entire thing as a political operation, not a legitimate intelligence operation.
So we're talking about people connected to Fusion GPS, Steele, with perhaps communist sympathies, perhaps, correct?
Certainly Marxist, socialist, progressive, all of those revolutionary movements, yes.
And then we have the Hillary Clinton campaign hiring this opposition research firm, Fusion GPS, which takes the dossier from Steele. We know that Hillary Clinton has really, quite frankly, a neo-Marxist worldview.
Yes.
She studied Saul Alinsky. Saul Alinsky, the Red, Saul Alinsky as he was called, wanted her to come work for him. I think she decided instead to go work on Capitol Hill as a staffer in Watergate. We know Bill
Right.
Clinton and his progressive socialist communitarian worldview of mixing socialism with capitalism during his 8 years as president. We know that what was in this dossier has turned out to be false. It led off to this Mueller investigation, which has been completely bankrupt and has proven nothing. But we then pass it off to an FBI director by the name of James Comey. Did he have any communist sympathies anywhere along the way?
Well, this is where it becomes really kind of hair-raising, because Comey's reputation, really up until this very moment, has been as a straight-arrow Boy Scout, Republican, very much by the book kind of public official, which at this point, really a reputation that should be in tatters. But the shock was, to me, was on discovering that in 2003, in an interview with New York Magazine, Comey admits very nonchalantly, and indeed treats it much like a joke, that when he was in college in the 1980s at William and Mary, he was a communist. He calls himself a communist. I'm not attributing anything to him. He explains that in the 1980s, he was a college communist. And when you knit that together with the subject of his college thesis, his honors thesis, which was on the Christian and politics, the hero of that paper is Reinhold Niebuhr. And before we even get into what Reinhold Niebuhr believed, but you've described him as a Christian Marxist, and I think that's entirely fair and descriptive. As a communist young man, Reinhold Niebuhr became Comey's touchstone, his big influence on the theory of political life and even the justice system. Throughout his life to this day, Niebuhr is still that same touchstone, still that great influence that Comey cites anytime you ask him about his intellectual influences. So in his entire career, which was largely most notable under Republican presidents, as a Republican, he was still following the Christian Marxist Niebuhr. So this becomes the way we understand what Comey is all about. Looking at what he thought about Niebuhr in the 1980s is no different from what he thinks about him today, because he is still citing him. So this is really quite shocking, because in addition to what Niebuhr believed in terms of this Marxist Christianity, it also is the sort of belief basis for a man who rose to be number 2 in the Justice Department in the George W. Bush administration, and then, of course, even more amazingly, as FBI director under the Obama administration and into the early days of the Trump administration. So this is an extraordinary deception that James Comey has put over on the American people in terms of hiding what he really believes in and acting with complete dereliction of duty and without any regard for the oath he swore to defend and protect the Constitution. So that's a big mouthful, but I think it's borne out in the red thread, looking at this philosophy that he very carefully studied and certainly manifested in so many of his behaviors.
Absolutely. My guest is Diana West. She's author of the tremendous book, The Red Thread. You can get it at Amazon or securefreedom.org. Our friends over at the Center for Security Policy, securefreedom.org. Or again, you can order it on Amazon. I highly recommend every American read it. In fact, if you were to read her book, The Red Thread, and you were to read my book, Marxianity, you will see that unbeknownst to each other, we discovered this when we were live on the air about a month ago. She was revealing the Marxism of the fifth column deep state and James Comey and Reinhold Niebuhr, and I was doing that with one of the biggest cultural Marxists in evangelicalism, Tim Keller, the evangelical deep state. If you read Marxianity and The Red Thread, my friends, you're going to see the intersections cross, and you're going to understand how indeed the cultural Marxists are using media, education, government, and religion. Media, education, religion, and government for their gains of a revolution in America. Remember, Herbert Marcuse of the Frankfurt School declared the old way of revolution is old-fashioned. The new way is the diffused and dispersed disintegration of the system. We must attack the existing morality of the culture. And that means penetrating the power centers of education and religion and media and government and putting their people in the key places. And this is the red thread that Diana West is showing throughout her book. And when you again read Marxianity, my book, her book, Red Thread, you see there's a cross-pollination going on. I mean, how many of you knew that the former FBI director, James Comey, who let Hillary Clinton off the hook for all that she was up to, including, bleach cleaning her hard drives and email scandals and a server in a bathroom with classified emails on that server, and all this reported to have happened, and he lets her off the hook. And you have to wonder why. Well, was there a red thread from Bruce and Nellie Orr to Steele to Fusion GPS to James Comey to John Brennan? We're talking the CIA director. We're talking the FBI director. We're talking about a Marxist, neo-Marxist Barack Obama in the White House. Is there a red thread that desired to have Hillary Clinton as president? Because, my friends, if they had been successful, I believe we would see taking place in America today the very kind of revolution that took place in Czechoslovakia in 1948. They did not have to fire a shot, and that became the model for communism across the globe. What did they do in Czechoslovakia? They just put enough communists and enough government bureaucracies to take over without firing a shot. 4 years of Hillary after 8 years of Obama, and I think their revolution would have been complete. And you'd have seen great diminishment of religious liberty, free speech, the internet, talk radio. You'd have the fairness doctrine, hate crime laws, the persecution of conservatives and Christians like we have never seen, but we've been given a reprieve. The question is, for how long? Diana, you mentioned James Comey and some of his quotes, and here he is again, the FBI director, being very religious. He's quoting, as I believe Reinhold Niebuhr was, a quote, Christian Marxist. And here he is, the FBI director, again, showing us that there's been a transformation with Marxism. We used to think of Marxists as atheists. Many of them now have come into the religious establishment, which is why I call it Marxianity, Marxism and Christianity merging. I have some quotes here. This is James Comey now, who was the FBI director, who gave Hillary the pass. Quote, Niebuhr believes that the Christian must pursue justice and that justice is achieved through power. The Christian must recognize this connection between power, coercion, and justice, end quote. What is James Comey talking about?
Well, he's talking about the ends justify the means, and he's talking about the tremendous harnessing the powers of the state against the citizens to further this notion of, quote, justice as he defines it, or as Reinhold Niebuhr defines it, which is very much redistributive. It has nothing to do with the constitutional system that he was supposed to be enforcing and protecting. It's truly shocking and terrifying to think of the power held by such people. And when you talk about the cultural Marxism of it all and the spread through the institutions, this is very literally the case with James Comey, because his own professor, a man named Livingston at William and Mary, had been a student of Reinhold Niebuhr at Union Theological Seminary in the 1950s. And a colleague there, Livingston was also a student of Niebuhr's colleague on the staff, a man named Paul Tillich, who was an associate of the Frankfurt School, and indeed had come over here in the 1930s as a refugee from Nazi Germany with many, many, many other members of what we call the Frankfurt School, what they called the Frankfurt School, what has become known as sort of the vector of cultural Marxism sort of spread across our campuses. So Comey is really an FBI director of the Frankfurt School. He is, through the generations, through this red thread, not just in our own time linking these players working today, but going back in time, back through the generations, linking us to the Frankfurt School and how it could be weaponized inside at the top of our own government.
Wow. James Comey became the FBI director of the Frankfurt School. That is a powerful comment, but one I believe is 100% accurate. Comey writes this, quote, "Justice is distributive," says Niebuhr, "and must be accomplished through power, with one eye on the standard of love and the other on the regulative principle of equality. He clearly believes the duty to establish this justice to lie with the government," in quote. Notice, Diana, that they're saying now that social justice is love. I've been studying another communist, another man who worked with the American-Soviet relations and worked with racist Margaret Sanger, and had sympathies toward the idea of socialism and progressivism. He was the father of situational ethics, Joseph Fletcher, who was also influenced by guys connected back to the London School of Economics, which is your Fabian socialist. Joseph Fletcher wrote a book in 1966, Situation Ethics. He's the father of situation ethics. And he declares that love is social justice, that real social justice is love. And you do whatever is in the best interest of social justice. And in the case of abortion, he says it's loving to abort a child that's not wanted. So if you want to do what's loving, then a child that's not wanted, you'd abort it, because how unloving would it be to have a child that wasn't wanted? So you must abort it. So now they've redefined the word social justice and situational ethics and power at all cost to mean love. The most loving thing you can do is, and then so notice how they redefined all their terms, masking terms, Diana?
Yes. No, that's and I think that it's right in line with Niebuhr's concept of love that Comey embraces. It is this redistributive, coercive, government-ordered reapportionment of life's bounty. I mean, this is everything from liberty to possessions to private property and all the rest of it. I mean, these people, you could take these words and transfer them with just a few little tweaks, and this could come out of a manifesto that could be issued by the Communist Party of Moscow or Beijing. I mean, these masking terms are what are used to lull people into believing they are doing good, and because people would like to do good, and these leaders profess to be doing good, but they are using the coercive powers of the state against the people. And I think that is one of the threads of consistency throughout this anti-Trump conspiracy. These people rejected the will of the people. They rejected the rule of law. They rejected the election, the whole concept of elections, and they sought to do everything in their power to overturn it and to destroy the results. And this is where you see the ruthlessness that places all of these people outside the American tradition. This is not American behavior. It is un-American, which I'm using that word very purposefully, hearkening back to a day when our legislatures actually examined un-American activities. There were activities that were so dangerous to our rule of law and order, so detrimental to our liberties as protected by the Constitution of the United States, that our lawmakers understood them to be un-American. And this would have been all of the totalitarianisms, the isms, such as fascism, Nazism, and communism. So once upon a time, we had lawmakers who were unafraid to examine this sort of the entry, the infiltration and subversion of our system by these same sorts of revolutionaries. And today, after all the years of essentially destroying these truth tellers and truth seekers, we are at a point where people don't even understand what it is unless we kind of take them through it and try to remind them that, yes, there are these standards, there are these non-situational ethics, these fixed precepts and beliefs that need to be rediscovered. And these people at the top of our government are trying to destroy them to the very end. And that's why this moment is so precious to us, because I think you mentioned earlier, we would not have had this moment. We would not have had this without the election of Donald Trump. So this is a moment of crisis, but it is a moment of opportunity. I don't know how we capitalize on it, except doing what we're doing and trying to engage people in understanding what it is we're really looking at. And that sort of is the story of the red thread, an effort to reintroduce these bad actors, these revolutionary actors who climb to the top of our government to take it down, and put them in the context of the red thread of this effort to take down America that's about at least a century old, if we go back to, say, the Russian Revolution in 1917. So we've really been facing this enemy ideology in an organized way for a century. And right now we do have a chance to understand and expose it, but it's late in the day, so that's why this is such an urgent matter.
Because we're one election away from them all getting back full power and getting back on track in the end of our republic as we know it. We know that the Frankfurt School were greatly influenced by George Hegel, thesis and antithesis, idea, opposite idea. You cause the conflict. The change comes from the conflict. People will get tired of the conflict. They'll compromise. They'll want to be a part of the group consensus, so they'll compromise. And so you take something like socialism and you mix it with capitalism, and it's communitarianism or Fabian socialism, and it ceases to be capitalism anymore, pure capitalism. You do this in the area of religion, mixing Christianity with socialism or Marxism, and it becomes what I call Marxianity or liberation theology. So many other names, common good, human flourishing, a lot of masking terms for mixing socialism or Marxism, I should say, with Christianity. And this is going on in the area of economics and government and law and religion. And we know that comes from George Hegel, one of the German philosophers that the Frankfurt School followed, the Marxist from Germany, the German Marxist that came to America to flee Hitler's regime and dropped down at Brandeis and Berkeley and Princeton and said, we're going to have a revolution going after education and media, education and media. George Hegel, they influenced them. We know that they were influenced by Sigmund Freud, who said that Christians and conservatives that believed in absolute truth were crazy, mentally unstable. The real crazy ones were the conservatives and the people of faith, the people that were acting out their natural inclinations of lust for killing and cannibalism and incest. They were normal. They're living out their normal inclinations. The crazy ones were Christians who suppressed those natural inclinations and went crazy. So the Frankfurt School and these guys that were influencing James Comey and Hillary Clinton and Saul Alinsky and the Italian communist Antonio Gramsci, you see their influences. And the Frankfurt School is following George Hegel, Sigmund Freud. They're following Karl Marx, who said, my object in life is to dethrone God and destroy capitalism. And they were also following, at the Frankfurt School, the fourth person, Friedrich Nietzsche, who said God is dead. Not only is God dead, but we've killed God and we can smell his rotting corpse, meaning we killed God in the conscience of Americans, or in the consciousness of man at that time. And it's so interesting because now we see these folks that are the cultural Marxists wanting to bring Christianity into their Marxism for what I call Marxianity. Now they want to appeal to spirituality. Now they want to appeal to the idea of what the Christian Marxists should do. But isn't it interesting that Nietzsche coined this idea of will to power? All there is power. Get power. It doesn't matter how you get it, just get power, said Nietzsche. And here's the Frankfurt School following one of four thought leaders, includes Nietzsche. Here's James Comey following some of the folks from the Frankfurt School and people that were influenced by the Frankfurt School, to the point you say he was the FBI director for the Frankfurt School mentality. But Nietzsche believed in will to power, master morality, slave morality. And he said the conservatives or Christians or people who believe in absolute truth and people of faith will be great slaves because they're that stupid as to believe in absolute truth. And he used to sign his name, Friedrich Nietzsche, the Antichrist, sometimes just the Antichrist. And Hitler liked to have his picture taken staring at a bust of Nietzsche. So when you realize who the Frankfurt School folks are, who influenced them, and that the FBI director, among others, including Hillary Clinton, who was running for president and had been Secretary of State and at one time First Lady under the administration of her husband, Bill Clinton, we got a real problem. And here you mention in the red thread, page 47, James Comey, quoting Niebuhr writes, quote, "To the sensitive spirit, society must always remain something of a jungle, which might be brought a little closer to the kingdom of God if only the sensitive could learn how to use force in order to establish justice," end quote. Well, I find again interesting. Will to power. We'll use chaos, a jungle. But this is what it takes to establish the kingdom of God on earth. And we know that going back to the 50s, we have guys like Edgar Bunge writing a book on collectivism in the church in America, meaning progressivism, socialism, that they hijacked, the socialists, the Marxists hijacked the idea of the, quote, kingdom of God. They hijacked it to use it as a front to bring about socialism. Oh, we're building the kingdom of God. And if you're really a good person of faith, you'll join us in redistribution of wealth to bring about the kingdom of God. I'm reminded of the quote by John Rockefeller, who said that he wished he could help us see the vision as it unfolds before him. He said, "I see the church leading the way as it should in all great movements, literally establishing the kingdom of God on earth." Well, the Bible doesn't tell us where to do that. Daniel chapter 2 says God brings his kingdom. We don't bring it in through socialism, but here's Rockefeller saying that. Rockefeller influenced the seminaries and church in New York that influenced some of these guys there that you've already mentioned. You mentioned Union, what was that you mentioned? The Union Seminary. That was funded by the Rockefellers. So they've hijacked the idea of the kingdom of God. Here's Comey quoting this idea of the kingdom of God, and basically we'll use the ideas of a jungle in power to bring about the kingdom of God. This again is really shocking because most Americans would have never thought that the highest levels of our government, you have guys practicing Marxism mixed with, quote, Christianity or liberation theology, Marxism mixed with Christianity, correct?
Correct. I mean, it is shocking, and it's overwhelming, really, once you start connecting these people to their beliefs. They have deceived us. We have been gulled and conned, and it's so important. I mean, you're making such a tremendous case for this, the widespread nature of this, and of course the intersection between the religious institutions and the government institutions. I mean, that is what is so amazing, is this sort of saturation that they have managed to create and achieve. Hillary Clinton, too, as a young person in the 1960s, it's also discussed in the Red Thread. She, the youth minister of her church, was introducing Niebuhr to her, was introducing Paul Tillich to her. I mean, the same influences that we can see in James Comey's education. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, she went on to be a tremendous aficionado of Saul Alinsky, if that's the right word. So these people gravitate to one another, and you start to understand why they would literally commit crimes to protect one another, why they would break so many rules, why they would risk all in this anti-Trump conspiracy. If we had a functioning justice system, and I don't know if we do, if we were to have one, so many of these anti-Trump conspirators already have broken so many tremendously serious laws around and pertaining to sedition. I mean, this is not a joke. It's not theoretical. It happened, and it's still happening. So, we are at this point of crisis, but it requires so much understanding to put it into perspective and context and really demand justice under our law, not anything larger or smaller than that.
Absolutely. Listen to this next quote by Comey in your book. And Dinah West has just done a great service to bring all this to the forefront. She quotes James Comey, former FBI director, writing, quote, "Thus, quote, it is the duty of a Christian in politics to have no specific Christian politics," end quote. And he's quoting Niebuhr there. Then he continues, Comey writing, quote, "By this, Niebuhr does not mean a Christian viewpoint is irrelevant, but that a set of Christian political decisions is impossible given the evil present in such decisions," end quote. So again, we're going to merge the idea of situational ethics, moral relativism with Christian politics. And this is, again, just going right back to, I believe, a communist, Joseph Fletcher, who in 1966 wrote Situation Ethics, talking about, hey, to be the good Christian situational ethics person, you got to believe in love, and love is social justice and might makes right. Again, this is at the highest levels of our government, and they're using a twisted religiosity to justify this.
Right. Right. No, it's incredible, and the thing that is just stands out also is that he's essentially apologizing or making the argument that the ends can justify the means. You can use any amount of force and coercion to achieve this love, as you say, the redistribution and social justice utopia, and yet you can go home and be a good Christian. There can be absolute breakage between the two lives, and it brings to mind, if you remember during the Clinton years, the word compartmentalization was something that was spoken of quite a lot, as if you could be one thing one day and something else another, or think of one thing in one context and something else in another. And it's the same creed, the same ideology binds these people, and they tell the American people something completely different, and then this is really who they are. So it's so important to follow this up and understand why these people, again, would not just wait till next time, not wait till the 2018 midterms, not wait till the 2020 presidential election, as is the normal American tradition, but to subvert the system, to use the surveillance state, to try to destroy a political movement. It's not only about Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump obviously is the lightning rod and the leader of the movement, but it's 63 million Americans who cast their votes for him that are the real target here. These Americans, and of course I'm one of them, are not supposed to have a voice. And that's what this is really about. It's anti-democratic at the most basic level. And it shows how dictatorial these people are, even as they are running our justice system, running
evil.
our FBI,
it's
running
evil.
our CIA.
It's absolutely evil. And Comey goes on to say, quote, thus he, meaning Reinhold Niebuhr, quote, thus he declares the heart of Christian politics to be the readiness to use power and interest in the service of an end dedicated by love, and yet an absence of complacency about the evil inherent in them. He goes on to write, the Christian in politics must be willing to transgress any purely Christian ethic. He must be willing to sin in the name of justice, end quote. Again, talk about evil. We're now going to be involved in tyranny and evil and sin and transgressing the law, the moral law, the laws of nature, nature's God, for pure power, and call this a Christian ethic, love, and justice. I also go back to the fact that not only did you point out that James Comey, the FBI director, was following Niebuhr, but you and I live on the air, as I've already mentioned once, but I want to follow through on that, noted that you and I on the air live connected the deep state in the intelligence community with what I call the evangelical deep state. In my book, Marxianity, that came out in November 2018, it's subtitled How the Evangelical Deep State and Their Useful Idiots Are Merging Marxism and Christianity Through Social Justice, White Privilege, Cultural Marxism, Illegal Immigration, Interfaith Dialogue, and more. And on page 29 of that book, here's what I write to connect these together, and you'll recognize these names. I write, page 29, others have noticed the same worldview emanating from Tim Keller. Tim Keller, by the way, folks, is the co-founder of the Gospel Coalition, what I call the Cultural Marxist Gospel Coalition, that thousands and thousands of pastors are a part of, and then they bring this cultural Marxism back into their churches under a masking term of the Gospel Coalition. We already see how they've co-opted the term justice and love and Christian ethics. Well, they're doing this at the Gospel Coalition that I expose in my book, Marxianity. And so on page 29, I write, researcher Tim Kaufman published an article entitled Workers of the Church Unite, the radical Marxist foundation of Tim Keller's social gospel, in which he exposes Keller's position. He writes, quote, and this is again quoting Timothy Kaufman, quote, there is one high-profile Marxist who is particularly effective at repackaging Marxism for a Christian audience. But due to his ability to disguise his economic philosophy, he's largely falling under the radar. That Marxist is Tim Keller, pastor of Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City. It may come as a surprise to his conservative evangelical readers that Tim Keller's recent book, Every Good Endeavor, Connecting Your Work to God's Work, is simply a recapitulation of the Marxist theory of alienation, and that Keller's solution to the problem of alienation is indistinguishable from Marx's. It will surprise his readers to know that Keller's theory of wages is derived from Marxism. It will surprise his readers to know that when Keller recommends modern examples of churches that implement a Christian economic ideal, he identifies churches and organizations that are thoroughly Marxist and are inspired by leftist Saul Alinsky, the author of Rules for Radicals, end quote. Kaufman's observations, I write, is supported by E.S. Williams in his excellent book, The New Calvinist. Of Keller and other purveyors of the social gospel, Williams says, quote, "It is a gospel that changes the terms of salvation and that loves the world and embraces its culture." Timothy Kaufman has examined Keller's claim that God's radical plan is that, quote, "we are to work together to make the world a better place, to help each other, and to find a purpose for our lives," end quote, and demonstrated that it does not come from biblical wisdom, as Keller wants us to believe, but from a Marxist worldview. To convince his readers of God's radical plan, Keller quotes from the writings of three Marxists, Robert Bellah, Gustavo Gutierrez, and Reinhold Niebuhr, without mentioning their political affiliation. In fact, Keller has surreptitiously replaced the gospel of Christ with the utopia of Marx and presented it as biblical truth. The importance of Kaufman's analysis is that it demonstrates how Marxist theology can masquerade as Christian truth, end quote. Well, Diana, that's exactly what James Comey's doing. And so here you have Tim Keller, founder of the Gospel Coalition, who some of our listeners may not even know who it is, what that group is. Our regulars do. But the Gospel Coalition is influencing thousands upon thousands of pastors, and they're planting churches with some of their members are planting churches with their own organizations, because it's organizations within organizations, and they're planting social justice churches all over the country. And who is their co-founder, Timothy Keller, quoting? Reinhold Niebuhr, to create a Christian Marxist utopia on earth. Who's James Comey quoting? Reinhold Niebuhr, to create a Christian Marxist ethic inside the FBI that says, get power, no matter how you get it. You have to sometimes do what is evil to get power, and then you get that power in order to be involved in redistribution, socialism, which is ultimately love. This, my friends, is how you take the power centers of government, education, media, and religion and transform a nation within without firing a shot. Would you agree, Diana?
Yes. I mean, it's tremendous. It's incredible the synergy, and it's incredible how multi-generational it is. I mean, when you think about it, men who are active in the 20s and 30s are deeply influential almost 100 or 80 years later, and yet their true identities, their true beliefs are largely unknown to most Americans, especially as they concern these tremendously important figures running the country. So Barack Obama claimed Reinhold Niebuhr was his favorite philosopher. Hillary Clinton studied him. James Comey is devoted to him. I mean, this is not just, us sort of imagining things or supposing things. These are hard facts. And what is amazing to me is the extent to which a Reinhold Niebuhr is so unknown to most people, even in terms of just a quick definition. I mean, generally people have heard of his name. I knew nothing. I confess to complete ignorance about him when I started this project. I knew he was a, quote, liberal Protestant theologian. I mean, that's kind of the description that follows him. I had no idea about this Marxist background, which, of course, in his day also meant a pro-Moscow background. I mean, he wasn't merely functioning in some kind of theoretical realm. He was instrumental in getting the United States in the 1930s to recognize the Bolshevik regime, which is something FDR did in 1933, reversing the policy of 4 presidents before him who refused to recognize the godless communists in Moscow who were butchering people, by the million. And he also was very involved in apologizing for communism through the Cold War as well, and found himself pitted against the great anti-communists of his time. So these had very big political ramifications back in the day, always along with the religious ramifications. So the two go hand in hand. So perhaps it's not shocking that his devotees would end up not only in the church, but in Washington. So it's a very all-encompassing kind of attack on our country. It isn't just one thing or another. It's throughout all the institutions, and it's when you see it weaponized against a duly elected president, perhaps that's enough to get everyone's attention. I mean, I don't know what else will.
Well, they hate us, and they hate the American people that voted for Trump. We don't have to agree with every policy of Donald Trump. We don't have to agree with some of his background or other things he's said or done to agree with some of the policies that he brought forward and represented. we hear a lot of talk about conspiracy theories. Oh, that's conspiracy theory. Reality is there appears to have been a conspiracy here by people connected with their socialist ideology who hate a constitutional republic. There apparently was an international conspiracy here by communists to stop him from becoming president and then oust him. So isn't it interesting? We're called conspiracy theorists by the ones actually carrying out a conspiracy, I believe. We also, I don't know if you're aware of the book, but there was a book written in 1950 by one of the Frankfurt School guys called, his name was Theodor Adorno, and he wrote a book called The Authoritarian Personality, and it's a very lengthy book. And what they sought to do was, having come from Nazi Germany, the Frankfurt School, and coming here after 1933 and dropped down at Brandeis, Berkeley, and Princeton to carry out a Marxist revolution, being that Hitler was a socialist and they were Marxists, they didn't get along too well. Some of them being of Jewish descent decided it was time to go, and they brought their trash here to America to have their revolution here. But they wanted to try to figure out what kind of person follows someone like Adolf Hitler, a fascist. And so they wrote this book, The Authoritarian Personality, in 1950. And they put together criteria for the kind of person that would follow someone like Adolf Hitler, a fascist. And they put together what's called the F scale test, and the F stood for fascist. And the media has begun years ago, while Trump was running, to talk about the Frankfurt School and the book by Theodor Adorno, The Authoritarian Personality, and say the Frankfurt School predicted Donald Trump. In other words, they went on to write articles, and I have talked about this on the air, describing anyone who believes in absolute truth, believes in God, has certain things you're not open to discussing. In other words, it's so black and white, there is right and wrong, it's not worthy to discuss because you have convictions that are rooted in absolute truth. There's no need to discuss it. Therefore, to them, you're not open-minded. And once you reach all these certain criteria on the F scale test, you are deemed to be a fascist. Well, reality is, who's the one writing this? Socialists, right? Socialists from the Marxist Frankfurt School, claiming that we conservatives that believe in absolute truth, believe in the idea of strong convictions, believe in God, if we believe in those things, we're now fascist. So isn't it interesting, Diana, that the ones running around labeling us Marxist are calling us fascist, when reality is, are we the ones depriving people of freedom of speech? Are we the ones shutting down their conferences? Are we the one kicking them off the air when they say something is not politically correct, like Judge Janine talking about Sharia and hijab? I mean, it was literally the Marxists and the Islamists and the Marxist front group, the Gamaliel Network, that was working with the Southern Poverty Law Center that shut us down in 4 out of 5 cities in April of 2018 from having our conferences. So they accuse us of being the fascists and the bigots and narrow-minded and haters of women, yet it's the Islamists that the Red Green Axis works with, Islamists that hate women, that hate religious liberty, that hate Christians, that hate Jews, that believe in women having to be basically slaves and how to put your wife on a couch and beat them. In other words, everything they proclaim about us, it's really what they practice, including when they say we're conspiracy theorists. They're the ones that have been involved in a conspiracy to overthrow a duly elected president, correct?
That is correct. And I always wonder if these people really believe what they're saying, because they are, first and foremost, engaging in information warfare. They are trying to beguile the public mind. They are trying to throw so much smoke and lies and toxicity. I mean, this is how disinformation works. It's a practiced art. It's not anything casual. It's something that the Soviet Union took to a remarkable level of professionalism in terms of trying to sway populations to believe black is white. I mean, going back to Orwell, we can look at the discussion of how language could be changed, which is exactly what we're really talking about when we talk about this ridiculous concept of love as defined by these totalitarians. They're just using labels to try to demagogue the people. And I think the same is true of the authoritarian mind, and that the calling people fascists. I mean, frankly, being called fascist by a communist is something that's been going on for 100 years at least. This is classic information warfare, classic distortion. that is supposed to put us on the defensive and saying we're not fascists, when really it's just a tactic. It's a means of demonizing, and the more we're armed with the facts, the more we're keyed into and following the reality and rooted in our understanding of what we see in front of our eyes and what we understand, not what people tell us to understand, the more we can discern this and understand it as information warfare that we can fight back against. Because yes, you're right, these are acts of deflection, they're acts of confusion. These people are not seeking to come to an understanding or seeking to put out facts that will make us understand each other or themselves or us better. They're just trying to destroy us so that we lose in the public square, so that we lose at the ballot box, so that we lose everywhere, lose it in Congress, in the theaters, in the churches. I mean, this is all about distortion and lies, and it's not about finding some sort of common place to debate. It's absolutely it's trash, really.
Are we talking about a revolution here? They're attempting a revolution.
Of course, it's a long march through the institutions, as the old phrase goes, and it's been very successful. This is this incredibly unexpected and providential moment of exposure that we've come to in the anti-Trump conspiracy. Imagine Hillary Clinton was supposed to win, and all of these machinations that we've been talking about would then have disappeared from view. Everyone would have been cleansed. James Comey would still be director of the FBI. John Brannon would still be director of the CIA, and on and on. And as you were describing earlier, we would be that much closer to complete destruction of the republic. Absolute, over. So this is an amazing moment, again, this period where we almost have the tiger by the tail, and it's frustrating because it's very difficult, and there any number of things can happen and probably will before we get to really a safe place again. But this is really a time for the ages where what we're living through.
Diana, basically they're attempting a revolution. It is the long march through the institutions, as Antonio Gramsci, the Italian communist, and others talked about. I believe we're also already involved in a civil war in America. When you have people at the highest levels, the deep state, thwarting the rule of law, a constitutional republic, weaponizing our intelligence community, doing what they're doing, this is a civil war. I don't think most Americans realize that there's an attempt of a communist revolution or a globalist revolution underway in America, much less would they know that in the process that civil war is going on. Would you agree with me that we're involved in a civil war already in America?
Yes, I think that is a way to describe it. I think of it more as the government is itself divided. There's the president in the White House really at war, if you want to call it that, certainly in a struggle with the rest of the government, with very few allies anywhere else throughout the government. So the government itself is divided along the battle lines you could describe, I believe, as a civil war. It's tremendous. His presidency itself is not fully powered. It is that bad, and it is that much of a dire struggle. So yes, I do believe we're in a period of a kind of civil war, and the incredible part of it is that we're actually witnessing it before us, central battleground being the government itself.
And it's happening at the state level with states that want to take our guns, take our Second Amendments. There's now a U.S. congressman talking about locking up Americans that don't want to give up their guns. We have the red-green axis working to overthrow our country. We have the attempt at Sharia to make that common in America. We have the idea of censoring people that speak truth under hate crime laws, blasphemy laws that speak ill against Islam. We have infanticide, states that want to kill babies after they're born. We have the rise of active euthanasia. I mean, even at the local, state, and federal level, there is a civil war going on between what is consistent with our constitutional republic. William Blackstone, the leading scholar for the Founding Fathers, saying that a constitutional republic is based on the rule of the divine. What the divine is ruled on, we don't rule against. So if we are watching the destruction of absolute truth and the purpose of government, which is individuals coming together collectively to defend individual rights, whereas they're going for the collective and thus the destruction of individual rights, because whatever benefits the biggest group of people is what they determine to be acceptable. Mobocracy, as the founders called it. So at every level, we are seeing people fighting against state, local, and federal government to actually put into place things that are contrary to our constitutional republic. which means shadow banning, blocking people, depriving their right to free speech, their right to peaceful assembly, as Herbert Marcuse in his 65 paper, Repressive Tolerance, called for doing, depriving conservatives and people of faith of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of peaceful assembly. I mean, how can we not describe this as a civil war? There's just not guns yet, although some conservatives and Jewish people are having the tar beat out of them on the street. I mean, if we're not involved in a civil war yet, then what does a civil war look like? I think we have old-fashioned ideas of what a civil war looks like in a modern age of technology, television, and social media, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a power grab. Everything we've been talking about really comes down to that. These are power-mad people trying to grab away our freedoms, and that is why it's so dire. And yes, that is something you fight a civil war over.
Let me ask you quickly in closing about John Brennan, because we've neglected to mention him. Because we've already talked about James Comey, head of the FBI. How about John Brennan, who was at the CIA in this nexus of red thread? Was he sympathetic to the communist or Islam?
Yes. He too was a communist openly in his youth, to the point where he voted for Gus Hall, Brezhnev's man in the United States, who was leader of the Communist Party in the United States in 1976. Shortly thereafter, he entered the CIA, and he told the CIA that he had voted communist, and he was still admitted to the CIA. So, again, we have to wonder about how far institutions already had been decayed to admit these kind of people who now, 20, 30 years later, have emerged as the leaders of the anti-Trump conspiracy.
And Diana, the deep state is still penetrating the CIA, the FBI, the State Department, and possibly even in key places within the executive branch. This isn't over. We're one election away from them getting back on track and having a revolution. But Donald Trump has got to clean out the deep state in his own administration, correct?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, without fear of impeachment. That may be why we're waiting for the second term.
Yes, indeed. Diana, you have done a great service for the American people. It's called Red Thread. Folks, I hope you'll get your copy. As you can see, I printed mine out on 8.5 by 11 and marked it up and tagged it up. You can get a copy that's bound on Amazon at Amazon.com, or you can get it at the website of securefreedom.org, securefreedom.org. It's been on the screen throughout the broadcast, securefreedom.org. You need to read The Red Thread. I know many of you have read my book, Marxianity, and if you read The Red Thread, it'll give you an understanding of how these deep state within the intelligence community and the evangelical deep state have merged. The Red Thread. Thank you for this service to the American people and for joining us on the broadcast today.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. I would just add that The Red Thread's also available as an audiobook, which I narrated.
You did. You narrated it yourself. Where can they get that?
That's available at Amazon. Or Audible.
Excellent.
And iTunes, yes.
Well, you read it yourself. Well, good for you. Folks, I hope you'll take advantage of this resource. It's a very, very important resource. Now, folks, don't forget, the way we bring you this program is two ways. Those of you who support us with a tax-deductible contribution at wvwfoundation.com, wvwfoundation.com, or belonging to our VIP club, where we archive all of our years of audiobooks, ebooks, conference DVDs, TV shows, radio shows, and more. Situationroom.net, situationroom.net. What a great broadcast with our friend Diana West, author of The Red Thread. I hope you'll get a copy and read it and spread it to all your friends, as well as this broadcast. Have them watch this broadcast. Well, till next time, I'm Brannon Howse. Thanks for watching. Take care.